What's up, bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina conversation. Today's episode features a chat with Shawtelle Madison. We're talking about her book, The Fallen Fruit. That book is available now. This such a cool conversation with Shawntelle. The book it's time travel, and it's about this family, this Black family who has a curse where one member from each family unit falls back in time, and they have no way of knowing what time they're going to end up in. And so it's obviously a lot of implications for just not just for any family, but for a Black American family. They don't know if the time they go back to where slavery might still be legal, and they've got to deal with that. But so this is really cool, getting like just deep into the nuances with Shawntelle, talking about those implications and how her own family history and things that she discovered about her own ancestry inspired the story of the Bridge family, and just kind of the little details and the challenges of writing a time travel novel in general. But either way, I'll let you guys get to it. Here is Shawntelle.
So today we've got Shawtelle Madison. We're talking about The Fallen Fruit. That book is available now. Shawtelle, thank you so much for joining me today. This book I just didn't see it coming, like the hold that it had on me. Such a cool premise, very sophisticated and also heartbreaking. And we're going to get into it. I got a couple bones to pick with you.
Okay, now here we go. Let's go.
There we go. But yeah, thanks. I'm excited to get dive a little bit deeper today. So to get started, can you give like a summary of the book so that people can follow along with the conversation?
Sure. So, The Fallen Fruit is about a multi generational saga about a Black family of time travelers. Essentially, the story surrounds Cicely, and Cicely is a Black history professor in the 1960s. She inherits some land and she discovers that through some clues that there is a family curse, and she's actually at the center of it, where there's the potential where she could fall back in time. So as the story unfolds, Cicely's doing her genealogy research into the Bridge family, and readers are actually introduced to many of the Bridge family members. And Cicely is hoping to prevent the curse and save herself from falling back in time. So, that is a very short synopsis about what the book is about, but there's so much more to it.
Yeah, I know. It's like when I was like reviewing it, I was like, okay, how many details do I tell? Where it's like still where readers can get an understanding without robbing them of some of the really like hard hitting moments. Cause I just remember thinking like, okay, time traveling, they have no control over it and they don't it's so terrifying because they don't know who's gonna fall and they don't know when it's gonna happen. They just know that after a certain age they're in the clear, or after a certain family, if a family member falls, they're in the clear, everyone else. And so it's I was like thinking about the implications of that, and just the fact of like that it's an African American family, it's a Black family. It's because I'm trying to put myself in that position. I'm like, if I was just you have a family curse where even at any point in these past a couple centuries that you go throughout the story, where I think it's 5 generations of the family, you're following this, and it's, oh, you don't know where you're going to end, you don't know when it's going to happen, you don't know who it's going to happen to, you don't know where you're going to end up, you don't know what time period you're going to end up in. And I was like, for me, that's terrifying. That's like an irrational fear now of mine. Just get dropped somewhere where I have no idea where I am, or what time it is. And I'm white. I have white skin, and yeah, I'm a woman, but just the fact that a Black family has this curse is so much more heartbreaking and terrifying. And it was just like, add that it adds so many layers to it. It adds so many layers of the implications and
Yes.
just the horror, and how much like just the preparation. Because then it was a little, once I got the hang of, I like how you structured it, but it took a minute to pay attention. Like
Yes.
it
Yeah.
took a minute to follow along, but I think that was done really well
Thank
from a
you.
storytelling perspective. And yeah, I just remember, okay, because we some family members who are aware of it, and they're walking around with always prepared. And then we also meet family members who have no clue what is going on, and they're grieving, they're terrified, they're like, what is happening? And it's because they have no idea, and they're so confused and they're so scared. And I was like flipping the pages. I was like, oh my God, wait a second. Like I was getting sucked in, and I was rooting for them. My heart broke for them. And it was such a cool concept. And
Thank
you
you.
definitely Yeah, absolutely. You tugged at the heartstrings and you like you made me yeah, I would care about this family, I feel like, even if we were just following some random shit, but that it is the fact that it's like there's this curse and they have no control over it. That was just like, oh my God. It's so scary. So yeah, I commend you for all that,
Thank
for
you.
getting yeah, I got so sucked in and I was feeling for these people and these it was really interesting to see at what point in the generations how much information they have and how familiar they are with what's going to happen or not, and it's there's a lot of mystery there, which again we'll get into it more, but before I want to get into your background a little bit.
Sure.
This isn't your debut, is it? You have a
No, it's not. I've
couple.
actually been writing
Yeah,
professionally since 2012.
yeah,
So I've written in other genres like urban fantasy, paranormal romance. Like I said, done a lot of romance and then some fantasy and such. So that definitely not my
yeah.
first book, but it's my first historical fiction.
So what I want to like pick your brain and explore like how you approached it. Were there any what was your experience like switching gears and just entering a new genre and entering like a new it's kind yeah, because you're going through heavily like the romance side of it. And even though like time travel I guess is considered like fantasy still, yeah, explore your process and how you approached it. Were there any like big lessons learned, stuff like that?
Oh my goodness. The switch from going to from urban fantasy, I previously had just had an urban fantasy mystery release in an indie series, and to switch over to historical fiction, I would say for me the biggest part of the jump was actually changing my process for historical fiction. What I mean by that is I would do in my series romance, other types of more contemporary. There was research, but for this one in particular, for this book, I was dealing with more than five time periods from, of
Mm,
course, the pre American Revolution all the way up to the 1960s. So each part, even within each part, there would be subsections where you might be in the 1930s, then the 1940s. And for each of those sections, I would actually have to do research. And so when I initially
mm,
started writing historical fiction, it was a black hole, girl, a black hole. So I am literally, when I had first started out, like the first hurdle I had was I would often discover a subject that I was passionate about, and then I would waste so much time. Might started out one of the first things that really got me was I was researching makeup in the 1920s. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. I can dive in. Girl, I lost 5 hours to just looking up research during that time period. And we're my time period, I'm saying narrowing it down to a particular year and a particular location and where they bought makeup, what types were available. But that's the difficult thing about research when I was starting out and changing my process was saying to myself, okay, I'm learning about this subject, but then when you learn about one topic, sometimes you discover another subtopic that is interesting.
yeah.
And so you're just bunny hopping from one topic to another. And then you look up, it's midnight, you haven't eaten dinner, and you've just wasted all of this time on a subject where, guess what? That makeup ended up being a sentence or two. Yeah. So the fact is that in writing this book, I really had to make sure that I tried to adhere to some type of time management where I know instead of just saying I can research whatever I'd like, I have to narrow things down to a window of time. And then I have to be very specific and maybe say, as I'm drafting out, okay, in brackets, I need to go deeper on this so that I can actually paint the scene so people can actually see where they're
Mm,
at. And also, I can make sure that I'm in the mindset of the particular character that I'm in. If whether
yeah.
they're educated, whether they're a farmer, what is their particular perspective in life? And that was all research, but it was focused research so that I didn't go off and fall headfirst into the black hole of research. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. I think I can imagine just even if you're only researching for one time period, but then you've got to categorize it and like you might find the same you might start researching the same subject matter but into two different time periods and you're like you get sucked in being like, "Oh, this is so interesting."
Yes.
Like
Oh my gosh. And it sounds nerd-tastic, but it's when I'm sitting there and I might look at newspapers in the 1940s and it's wow, this is what people were dealing with then. Or I hate thinking about it, but in around when the Spanish flu was around, and then I'm seeing the
Mm,
parallels to the 2020s for us. So
yeah,
there was
yeah.
just so much more to for me to learn, and so much of it that didn't go into the book, but it was yeah, I jumped on the crazy train and I rode it into the sunset. So yeah.
Oh, man, I can only imagine how that would, like yeah, that was probably a process in and of itself is to choose which tidbits make sense to squeeze in there, and then how much detail to use of those tidbits. It's that's so funny. You're like, "Oh, this the makeup was like 1 or 2 sentences," even though you spent, like, so much
5
time.
hours lost.
That is no, they were well spent, I
Oh,
will say
thank
that for
you.
you, like, I always say it's part of the process, right? Like, it takes the time that it takes, and who knows, maybe, like, somewhere down the line, you might do another historical fiction, and
The
you'll be
makeup.
able yeah, you'll use the makeup, or you'll just at least know you'll know better and to be like, "Okay, Shawtelle." Set a timer for yourself. Open more than 5 tabs on lipstick, right? That's so funny. Yeah, piggybacking off of the research, was there anything that, like, you found most fascinating or you were most surprised to learn? I imagine you had a million things that you were like, "Oh, shit."
Yes,
Like
shit is the perfect term. Oh, shit. The thing
yeah,
is that the temptation when my most favorite time period to write was the American Revolution, Sabrina's
okay.
time, Sabrina
Mhm.
and Luke. And in particular for Luke, one of the things that I absolutely loved is when I had an opportunity to really go beyond what I had learned in school about the American Revolution, especially from the perspective of a free Black family
Yeah.
and also for Luke, what was it like for a free Black man to actually enlist and actually participate in the American Revolution? And for me,
Yeah.
that was just so eye opening in terms of what I could do and the temptation to just have someone do all the battles, do all the things was so strong because there was just such a wealth of information. But instead, for me, I used one of my ancestors who actually participated in
Mm.
the American Revolution Shadrach battles. And so I looked up his information, found out that the man actually was on the muster rolls for Valley Forge, and so it was just easy for me to trace his path through history. And it, for me, there was so much more that I could have given, especially even for Sabrina, for her time period. And no spoilers, but there was so much that more that I could have done in terms of her journey. But I had to, when you're actually making a dress or making something, snip a little here, cut a little there to make
Yeah.
sure everything flows from one place to another. But yeah, if I could have just written so much more about the American Revolution, I would have because just there was so much that I had learned.
That's so crazy. I think I read in like your author's note or something that you came up with the kind of got the idea for the inspiration because you found your own family history. I think that is
Yes.
so cool. That is so cool. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So what ended up happening is while I was doing I've been doing genealogy for like over 10 years now.
Okay.
And one of the things that I had found is that genealogy is the long game. It's about hunting and pecking, working your way down one part, up one part of the tree. You run into a roadblock, so you jump up the other. And one of the things that I found is on my mother's side, I only went so far, and then I was starting to butt against the 1870 wall. And what the 1870 wall is specifically for African Americans. They were freed in the 1860s due to the Emancipation Proclamation. And in the 1870s, that's where a lot of folks were first on census records. And
Mhm.
yes, and at the time, I actually butted up against it, but then I actually dug deeper, corresponded with some relatives of mine, and then I discovered that there was a group of free Blacks in the Charlottesville area with my family. And one of those folks was my sixth great grandmother, Amy Bowles Farrow. And Amy was amazing. She was a formerly enslaved woman who lived in the pre to post American Revolutionary period. She saved up her money and she ended up buying hundreds of acres of land in the Charlottesville, Virginia area during a time where a for a free Black woman was ridiculously rare. And
Yeah.
when I was exploring what she went through, purchasing the land, being surrounded by all of those big plantations, Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, a lot of other things, I felt really inspired by her story. I felt really inspired about her children's journey and how they were resilient. And so I was like, yes, this location is special. And so, of course, I write speculative fiction. So it's all about the what if. And so I just tossed in just a little bit of a curse, a little bit of time travel. And that's how the Bridge family was born, to where that gave me an opportunity to explore the land, explore my ancestors, but then, of course, throw in a little bit of mystery and a lot of that conflict with the time travel.
Yeah, that is so cool because I imagine how crazy that would be, like, how many records or how many lives that just weren't tracked because they were considered property. Like,
Exactly.
that's so wild to me, but now that I know that, I'm like, "Well, of course." I'm like, "Well, yeah, okay, that makes unfortunately, that makes sense." And yeah, that's so wild. That's so cool that you were able to find that and not only just find your relatives, but find how remarkable
Yes,
some of the things that she accomplished and her family members accomplished just, like, by saying, "Nope, I'm gonna own something for myself, like, I'm gonna do this." In a moment where who knows, like, how many ways or how many times their spirits were crushed or it's like,
yes.
to really persevere like that, become a property owner, and just, like, to own their own land in a region where they were surrounded by people who weren't cool with that probably.
And they still made
That
a
is
living for
crazy.
themselves, and the generations continue to own the land. Now, of course, the property shrunk, folks sold off bits of it, but for me, this book gave me a huge opportunity to learn about how my ancestors lived. So it not only was it a moment for me to bring fictional people to the page, but it was a chance for me to connect deeper with my background.
Yeah, I love that, that's so cool. I know because it's I don't know, I'm half of my family is my mom's side is Mexican, and there's that's the thing is, like, some of her my family members, like uncles, they still own, like, properties on both sides of the border, so
Wow.
that's it's been yeah, it's been, like because my grandfather, he owned, like, 2 ranches, and then he started a convenience store chain around there. So it was really cool to visit and see the places, and I've been to visit them a handful of times. And then my dad's side is Irish, and so I know very little about it. I just know that I know, like, the history of the Irish when they started coming over, they were seen as
Exactly.
immigrants are taking our jobs, but they were people from Europe were coming here for all sorts of reasons, at least for a certain time, but I know that I guess, like, my dad's like, my great-grandfather, I think they him and his siblings were just shipped over, like, in 2s and 3s, like, they wouldn't even come all together as a family, and then they were adopted out. So it was like it's stuff like that where it's, like, crazy to think of the history of it, and it's I don't know, maybe it's just people like you and me think that's so cool, but I guess I didn't learn to appreciate it until I got older, and I was like,
Exactly, that was
"Yeah,
me. I was just like,
yeah."
"Oh, I'm descended from coal miners. That's cool." But I think it's as we grow older, we become more introspective and wonder, as our lives is going on, how did I okay, I know how I reached this point, but
Yeah.
how did my parents reach this point? And what are the things that are occurring over and over again? And how can I do better? How can I live better? That kind of thing.
Yeah, because you think it puts things into perspective of, like,
Yes.
how lucky we are that they they took those risks and they
Yes, yes.
took the leaps and they did what they did, and especially at a time where it was, like, so difficult and it was so scary. I give credit to just people who just leave everything they know to come to a different country to try to build a life for
To
themselves where
me,
they
that
don't
is
know
so
anybody.
frightening. That is so frightening
Yeah.
to think
They don't know
that
the area, they don't know the
yes,
language, they don't yeah. They don't have jobs, sometimes they have
exactly. You're just
relatives, but
hoping
that's about it.
it's all about hope, and that was one of the things I really touched upon in the book is the hope of our ancestors to even if you have nothing or you're facing adversity, the hope, and I you had that in your ancestors, the folks that started up businesses from nothing, the folks who came over from the boat. It's a thread that carries over that is so relatable and oh my gosh, owning multiple stores and businesses, that is so wild.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy, and even, like, my yeah, even though, like, with my mom's moms, like, they are from, so my mom's dad's side is from California, it's from the border over there, and then my mom's side, they were in Texas, but they were like, they lived in Texas before it was Texas. They like
Mhm.
generations ago before that border moved, and I was
Yes.
like, and it's so crazy, like, that's another thing, that's another situation that there's is like a huge collective of, like, people, community of people where, like, they didn't really I don't think they had much of a say to switch nationalities, like, the
Yes.
border crossed them. They just stayed put, and then they was like, now they're part of America, and I just some of that's so fascinating to me, but it's also like my mom would joke, "Nobody's kicking us out. We've been here."
We were already here.
We were here when you guys wanted to you wanted to take more land, we were already here. Yeah, no, that's absolutely, I think that's probably why I think the more historical fiction I read, the more I like it. It's just, yeah, it's just stuff like that where, yeah, these are true events and these are true histories. But yeah, like you said, speculative fiction, like you could speculate and choose one story or 5 stories to tell amongst
Yes.
one family and their complicated situation, and it just, yeah, there's so many, I just imagine there were so many ways you could take that. That's so,
Yes.
yeah, it was so amazing, I know. So, backing off of that, like, almost with the research or with the, way you structured the book, you had to keep track of different timelines and went back and forth a little bit just to, like, keep it structured and keep it organized and, like, switching POVs and stuff like that. So how I want to explore like how you approach that. Was that Do you usually switch timelines or points of view in your other works? Was this something new for you?
I have written at most. Usually, I play with dual, meaning I have dual
Mm,
POVs, so 2 people. Um,
yeah,
and I think before I have played with a little bit more than that, but most of the time for me, I keep it simple. So, bouncing around in 2 people's head is not too hard, but to have multiple perspectives, and then the family tree, and then to be in each of these individuals' head with their individual family members, I had to be meticulous, as in from the scene level in tracking everything. And one of the things that the tools that I had used a little bit later was Aeon Timeline. And Aeon Timeline allows me to track by the scene level who's in the scene, what their ages are. And as people time travel and go back, then I can make adjustments so that I make sure that I keep their ages straight as the time moves forward from that. Because before that, I was doing it by hand, and that was a
mm.
mistake.
No.
I was messing up ages all over the place.
Oh, no.
Yeah, having somebody go back in time when they're 15, for example, and then suddenly the ages are jumping wrong. I found that I had to actually, in tracking everything, is I use a tool, another writing tool called Scrivener. And Scrivener
Mm,
allows me to write things by scenes versus maybe in Word where I'm just writing out the entire manuscript. So on a
sure, yeah.
scene level, I can actually in Scrivener give myself little notes. Okay, I made a change here in the 1700s. I need that change to reverberate toward the future. So I make a note in that scene. Hey, remember the next time you come in here, you do work, to actually jump ahead and make some changes because now Bob's wearing a green shirt. And so when
Yeah.
he's in the future, that green shirt needs to carry through because that green shirt, this is just not a spoiler, that green shirt is just special. That's just showing that I have to be meticulous, but I use tools to do it because it's actually, as a human being, the cognitive load got really heavy after page 300
Yeah.
trying to
Oh
track
god.
all that. So instead, like I said, instead of jumping on the crazy train, I just use a lot of notes.
Yeah, oh my god. I was just thinking of that because even for the reader as myself, I'll just speak for myself. But yeah, it was like, because it could get tricky. Like you want to respect the reader's time and their energy level, like
Yes.
their brain energy that they're
Yes.
willing
Okay.
to.
Now. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's, I don't know, I like more sophisticated storylines. It's as long as I got like my little fluffers, fillers in between, just something that like I can cool down with, like romance or whatever. But yeah, I remember just track and then because yeah, there's like time travel, like it's tricky. Like you have to be consistent. Like that's, and
Yes.
then you have to have where if something happens, like you're saying, it has to show up. It has to makes sense. And it's so crazy because, yeah, like Cecily, she's, what can I do? She's, let me see if I
Exactly.
can do something here. And then once you get down to it, yeah. And I think that was like just little things like that where I found that was so clever. And then that was like, it added like a little something for me, for the reader, where I was like, oh, so I just appreciate that. And I just appreciate like the effort that went into it. Just like I said, like with time travel in general, it's just, yeah, it's funny when I talk to authors, I'm like, "Did you have a million Post-it notes everywhere?" Like, you have a big, like, white, like, timeline board of
I was tempted to have a board, but I am a techie. But I also have this quirk to where if it exists as paper or if it exists as something tiny on my desk, it no longer exists. So my
Mhm,
mind needs that digital connection. And that's why I
sure.
was saying Aeon timeline or using notes within Scrivener that's right in the scene itself to where it's okay, hey, you can't miss this scene right here, you have to make yes, that blatant. Or, hey, I'm in this scene in Aeon Timeline, and I have to keep track of these people who are in the scene. So I needed something very definitive versus trying to look at a board and think, oh my gosh, that board would have been a hot
Yeah,
mess with
yeah.
all a bunch of lines connecting things. And I tend to try to leave breadcrumbs so that people can see how one timeline connects to another. And so I did give myself a visual representation early on so that I could see how the entire book was structured and the people that travel within it. But anybody who's looking at it's going to be like, this is wild. So it's actually was just easier to have the family tree. And like you said, you could actually see what's coming. So that was one of the powerful things that Cicely had was she could be like, okay, I know who's about to be born. I know who's going to disappear. But the question
Yeah,
always comes into how did it happen? And how
yeah.
are the people in the tree related to other people in the tree? And how were their lives touched by each other. So even though the tree actually technically reveals information, there's so much more it doesn't reveal.
Oh my god, I know. And just aside from the fact that, yeah, if there weren't enough layers, I'll get there just might be some spoilers. I'll just do some clever editing to make sure that we're not giving away too much. But because I'm thinking like, yeah, also, so another layer was that where some family members, they think they're safe, but what they don't know, or they think they know they're safe, but they don't know why. And it's
Yes.
like they don't, and only to have it revealed that, oh no, you're just, we have not been you just like, people have not been honest to you about who your parents are. And that is,
The thing is, I feel like this is so relatable when
yeah,
we actually hear about the tea from family
yeah,
members who were like, yeah, so and so, they're actually your mom's sister. Or you may think that person was actually adopted. That is actually not a blood family member. That is actually the neighbor's child. And so that was one of the things about for me that was so cool about genealogy was finding out the tea. And
yeah,
of course, in any time when you have a book with time travel rules, you got to break them or you got to break any type of rules to have some fun. But yes,
yeah.
that for me was when you that an example of when you learn the tea from family members because oftentimes in families people are not honest, especially when they
No.
make mistakes and those
It's just, yeah, and everybody wants to follow the lie. Everybody, even if they
yes,
know it's a lie, they like still are like, no, this, we're gonna go along with it. We're gonna gloss over it. And it's, yeah, it's so many. It's almost, it could be argued that's like almost like human nature. It just
yes, right
happens.
there, right there.
All walks of life, all walks of life, all sorts. No matter what time period you're in, no matter where you hail from, it happens. It People just do what they do. And
There.
yeah, and that just, that adding that human nature to, and then, and if they don't, and it's even at a point where it's okay, yeah, they do these things, but then they didn't know the consequences, the potential consequences of doing things like that. Of
Exactly.
just mixing and matching, for a lack of better words. It's yeah, that was like another, I was like, if you didn't have enough layers into this story, like you raised the stakes. And as the reader, when I got to those points, I was like, "Oh no."
Yeah, a lot of those were not planned. A lot of those, like
Oh,
I said, when I mapped out The story, oftentimes when I was doing each, whether it was Reba, Sicily, or Amelia's, a lot of those moments actually were on the fly. So
Mm,
that
mm.
where no, that's not the way it works. And so it those twists definitely took me by surprise too.
That's so cool. I love that. I love how, like, you get surprised too while you're trying to come up with where is this gonna go. That's awesome. That was like Yeah, oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. So let's see here. So touched on it. You had to navigate kind of heavy themes like with the whole
Yes.
slavery aspect that we barely touched on, the racism and then just the war, the actual historical, the real realities of like war and our characters. He had to fight with his family members, but he couldn't tell them. Like, and he couldn't, and he was thinking like, okay, is there anything I can do for them? And then yeah, those are like heavy subject matter. So like how did you navigate that? How'd you get in the zone? How'd you pull yourself out? Was it different than other things that you've done in the past? Stuff like that?
Yeah, in the past, I have written things to where I have ugly cry or where I really get myself into my character's head and I feel their pain. In this book,
Mm.
though, it was like getting kicked while I was down. Like
Ugh.
where I am putting myself, it's so important for me to actually try to make sure I understand the perspective of my characters. So that as the
Mhm.
story unfolds, the reader can follow along with me. But in particular, I will say the person who writing their scenes actually, where I had to walk away from the keyboard a couple times, and I will say, yeah, no spoilers here. It was definitely Cicely's part, and I would say it was more because she is a mother, but also she has modern day perspective.
Yeah.
We actually really get into her head, and we see what she's leaving behind. We see the life that she's built, and so those moments as it unfolds in her journey was painful. Just putting myself into those moments. And I think you, knowing that you've read the book, you probably can pick out some of the chapters where for me it was very difficult and having to touch on the topics of how for African Americans so much has changed, but so much has remained the same. So for me to actually go back and look at that, also as the perspective of a woman, it was a lot to lift, and I tried to give myself grace and give myself moments where like, hey, I'm still writing a book here. This subject matter is heavy. I am putting myself into this person's head, so this is going to hurt, but I also have to make sure that after I get the words on the page and I've as they say bled on the page, that I walk away and I give
Yeah.
myself like, hey, do I need a couple days? Do I need a week? Do I need to talk to my critique partners so that
Mhm.
I can unpack what I'm feeling? Like it's a coat. I put it on, but I also got to take it off. So
Yeah.
each time I did that, I had to be like, okay, let's go through a process and allow myself to unchain myself from my character.
Yeah, I can only imagine just because I don't have that sort of, those implications with the skin color. Like I said, my white skin, I'm still a woman, so there's things that I'm aware of that would have affected me if I dropped I don't know, 20 years in the past, 40 years in the
Yes,
past,
yes.
whatever. And it's just yeah, it's like looking into that things are better, but not completely. And it's just like when I have to remind myself, I'm like, what was it? 50 years ago, I would not have been able to get a credit card in my name.
Right
So
there.
yeah,
And you would
that's
have
so messed up.
judged so many ways in terms of getting property, yeah, jobs, salary still.
Seriously,
So there
yeah.
would have just been so many. And then also, I think I one of the things I forget about is we are so used to our current existence right now. We know how to pay our bills. We know
Yeah.
how to get a driver's license, social security card. We know how to find a job. But if you take yourself back 100 years, you're starting off at square one. And so
Oh,
for
yeah.
me, that is just absolutely devastating. And it's just, like you said, it's that thing of tension that you just have to endure what's happening and it's ride through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, and it's yeah, because I think one of the things I thought about was like, okay, just imagine that from even from Luke's perspective. He doesn't know he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what happened. And then he risks getting picked up because of the time period, and people think he's like not a he's a runaway slave.
Hmm.
And then even so, it's there. I can't remember if it was Luke. He had his freedom papers, or like there was a character who had the freedom papers, but the date was wrong. It was like 4 years in the future. It was just like he was so close to having
Yes.
safeguard, and I was just,
Yes.
"Oh god, like, these people can't catch a
Yes.
break." I
That's the thing is that if you don't know
Yeah,
when you're going to fall back to, and at the time, his mother, of who of course is somebody else, she knows the history, but yet, and just a teeny bit spoilery, but the fact is that she is not going to know everything. And
yeah.
so that gap is actually another thing of danger. Just because the history, just because the genealogy doesn't mean all of the tiny little tidbit facts. And those are the things that get us in trouble.
Yeah, especially just speaking from a historical perspective, like how tapping into what you said earlier, how you got to learn things that you didn't learn in your normal, like, school curriculum.
Yes.
It's just I think just how history is sometimes taught, we hear the facts and the informations and the names and the dates and, like, what led up to certain events, but, like, the psyche or the context is, like, some of the things, like, we just don't have insight, or
Yes.
people just don't deem them necessary details when it's no, sometimes I wanna know. I find it fascinating, like, how one family in history, what their experience it was during this crazy event. It's things like that where it's just, what does that do to the brain? Like, what does that do to your survival mode, to
Yes.
your hierarchy of needs? Like, what
Yes.
it's like and then the generational trauma that you mentioned. Okay, you're being raised by people who are just looking, "No, we're not gonna talk about our feelings. We're worried about making sure we got food on the
Exactly, that's already
table."
hard enough. That's already hard enough to make sure I feed
Yeah,
you. But yeah,
yeah.
dealing with the trauma of not only potentially losing a child, but then the trauma of having lost an auntie or an uncle or a cousin, and to just have it carry over, that's just people are going to be carrying that around.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and we're touching on Sicily, it's like how hard that those moments were for you to put on paper. It was like, yeah, because I'm thinking, like, 'cause I've got 2 little boys, I've got a family, and yeah, I'm thinking, like, no, if like, knowing that this was gonna happen and knowing that there's nothing you could do about it, and you're never gonna, and
Yes.
that's so heartbreaking, and then they're never gonna know. Her family's never gonna get closure, and that's so fucking sad. It's ugh, you're like,
Yeah,
you hit
you
us
would
there.
yeah, one of the things I always thought of is what if Cicely would have actually, once she knew she was gonna fall, she very likely would have sat and done research to see if she could find herself, or to see if perhaps she left herself a note for herself in the future. But the thing
Mhm.
is, there nothing ever changed. She still was going to fall. No note was ever given. So obviously something happened in the past to where Cicely had to make the decisions that reverberated to the future. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of, yeah, how like the Back to the Future movies. It reminds me of where is the like Marty McFly, he got a letter delivered to him that was written, like, I don't know, like, 4, and it's no, he's gonna be here at this point, at this moment, and this is the letter. Give this to him when get this moment. So then for him, he's confused and he's, "Oh shit, what do I do?" And then he gets more information right away. And so that kind of, yeah, that's what that reminded me of. Oh, does she leave herself a note, a letter? Does she like lead breadcrumbs for herself so that she maybe doesn't have, she's not going in blind and totally like unknowing in the future, like finding these details and yeah, because on the she goes on the property and she finds these little like survival kits and the Bible and the rules
Yes.
and that, yeah, that's she's wait, what?
Yes, but even
It's so
after she
crazy.
finds those clues, yeah, another spoiler thing is, remember, she was trying to change Owen's the shooting. She was trying to change history. Like I said, it could be possible that she did try to pull a Marty McFly, and she did try to leave herself something in the future, but events unfolded to where that information never got to her. So I think
Yeah.
she was trying to change fate, and it was not ever meant to be that way.
Yeah, or yeah, exactly. It's like the reality of it. It's the way things are, that's how they turned out. Like,
Yes, right there.
the past
Yes, you hit
already
it on the
happened.
head right there.
Yeah, it's just no matter what she does, those yeah, that might her actions probably might have led up to the situation no matter what. It's yeah, it's okay, maybe if I just do nothing, will that help?
Yes,
Like, I
exactly. That actually sounds easier.
it really oh gosh, I know. It's so that's why I'm a little interested and impressed in when authors decide to tackle time travel because it's so complicated and
Yeah.
it's
Oh my gosh, yes.
yeah. So I'm gonna throw this at you. What were the most challenging parts to write? What were the most enjoyable parts to write?
For me, the most difficult parts to write were Cicely's parts, especially as someone since she's more contemporary than the others. And I could actually see what she was going to lose in terms of modern day technology, modern in the 60s. And then, of course, the fact that she had a job, she had a husband, she had a family, and putting myself in her head was actually very painful. So, that actually part four, I actually knew what was going to happen. And that was the dread for me as an author to actually have to
Mm,
put myself knowing that was coming. That was actually hard. But I would say the part where I had the most fun and I enjoyed it the most was definitely Sabrina and Luke's part. I really had fun. I really enjoyed the American Revolution, and to actually get a chance to really see what my ancestor, what Amy Bowles Farrell's life was like. It was just, I absolutely loved it. I loved exploring Charlottesville. I loved going deeper with what their day to day. What was it
yeah.
like to do embroidery? It sounds so simple, but for me, that simplicity was cool. And so, of course, non spoil, not going to offer any spoilers, but I really loved the way the events unfold between the dynamics of the relationship between Luke and Bree. It was
Uh,
hard to really put myself in the character and imagine what was her like, what her options were, the fact that what she was pining for someone, and what were her options in that situation to where future events were going to paint how these events happened. So,
yeah.
yeah, that was hard. It
Yeah,
was
I
fun.
know. I know. I was like, of course, as a reader, I'm like, no, just switch. Just be with the one that you want. Like,
Exactly, exactly, exactly. That
it's easy
the
for us to say.
I used to say that
But
was the temptation. That was the
yeah,
temptation, was just to be like, "Oh, I'm all about the HEA or
yeah,
HFN." But in this, I was like, in this one, I already know what the tree looks like, so I already know
yeah,
how things are going to unfold.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I know, I know. I liked their part for sure. I think because we get a little bit more invested in it. Because in the other stories, it's a little more. Because I think with him, you see what he goes through to find his way back,
Yes.
and then we see the moment that he's trying to, like, "Okay, I know you guys know me, but this is who I
Okay, yes, I'm just some random dude that shows up. Okay, I look like your nephew, your son, but I just look 20 years older. I Come on now. Back then, folks would have looked at him and been like, "Yeah, you fought in the war, but you hit your head on the way here."
Yeah, right? I know, it's like, as the reader, we're like, "No, come on, it's Luke," but then as the family, you're just like, you I get it. I was like, "What are you talking like, who are you?" I totally get it. I totally get it. It was so funny. It was just like that adds to the frustration for the reader. We're, "No, come on, just hug him, accept him with open arms, look at some pictures." I don't know, even though modern photography was not
Yeah, I was
around.
about to say that's the hard part. It's I know you were 18 years old. You were this young kid and now you're older. This makes no sense. How do you rationalize
Yeah.
it back in that time period?
And then it was just like what, like a week later, right? A few days later, we're in between. Yeah, they're like, "What?" They're like,
Exactly.
"You like what?" Yeah, exactly. That's okay. We all got PTSD. Like you need to be you just stop talking. You just stop talking. Like what? Oh my gosh, there's just like so many fun things that you can like weave in there. So much fun drama and realistic like character reactions where I was like, you know what? I would like to think that I would believe someone, but I'd also probably be like, you need, I would call like a mental health specialist. Like,
Yeah, that was one of the things that came into play is if somebody straight up told you, like on the street, came up to you and said, "I'm a time traveler," you're
Yeah.
gonna be like, "Okay, you need to time travel to Bali and have some time off because 'cause you've been working too hard." And it makes no sense. We do not, to us, it's fantasy. It's not something
Yeah.
based in reality. To have any situation where somebody comes up and says that to you, it's like, how do I show definitive proof? How do, in the scene where Cicely had to convince someone, it's like, how do you convince someone of time travel
Yeah.
in reality?
Yeah, I know, because it's one of those things. It's so funny because 'cause I'll talk to my husband what things are, like, maybe possible, and it's just because we watch, like, our nerd shows and, like, our
Exactly.
entertainment. We keep up with our shows and our movies and all that, and so it's, "Okay, are zombies possible?" Well, probably I think the whole issue is that they don't like, there's science, there's the nerve
Yeah,
endings in there,
there
there's, like
should be some type of
yeah.
scientific basis. Obviously, we're
Yeah.
frightened. We're scared of zombies and the possibility of what it could do to our civilization, but it's
Absolutely,
still that,
absolutely.
okay, we're not gonna the fungus that controls our mind, that's too much of
Yeah.
a stretch for it to jump to human, so it's now.
It's like the primal what would make, like, the primal need to feed? Because 'cause I'm thinking all the way back to Resident Evil days where it's just like how and or even like George A. Romero, like, where he was the father of the living dead, and
Yes,
so, yeah,
yes.
it's yeah, so it's like to see, like, all these different takes on it, but then, yeah, it was, like, also time travel. It was like, we can't technically there would be really no reason, but it was like it would also have to be like, okay, I don't know. We're just going off on a tangent. It was like, okay, either you're traveling through time or you can travel through space, but can
Mhm.
you do both? It's there.
Mm.
It's like there's all these little things that's okay. Because in your story, the premise is they just stay in one spot when they fall, and they're extra confused because they're like, wait, like I there was a cabin here and property, but now it's like an open field, and it's so that type of stuff. And yeah, and I liked how you added also those little details of like families that were trying to avoid it, and so they, like, moved away, but then when they fell and there was, like, not they were, like, not familiar with the region. They had no idea, and there weren't these things put in place by previous the ancestors who caught on to it. And it was really funny when I was talking to my husband about it. I was like, "So, this book that I'm reading right now," I'll update him a little bit, and I was like, "So it's like a family." I was explaining, like, "Yeah, it's generations of there's a family curse, and they fall back in time, and they don't know when it's gonna happen, and blah blah blah." And then I was like, I was telling him that, and he was like, "Oh, okay." It was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then I was like, "Oh, and by the way, the family is black, so they don't know if they're gonna fall back in time where slavery was still legal." And he just was like, "Oh, shit." Like, he was like
It's about to get real up in here.
yeah, and so that was also it's, like, cool to see the little nerd side of it and just to be like,
Yes.
"So wait," I was like, "Honey, I got something for you here." I was like but it was just really funny to talk to him, honestly, like, the speculative things about it, but then also be like, "No, but the family's black and they might be falling into a time where they might not be free or it doesn't make sense that they're just a random black person wandering around."
I mean, it could be,
And
there's so many dangers to it. Like I said, I even had briefly played with the thought of what if one of the bridges had agreed to go look to Liberia. So there was a point when they had slavery and there were groups of people that went over to Liberia. And I said, what if when the bridges agreed and went to Liberia, but during the crossing, they fell. And so that's the thing. There's so many possibilities and directions where this could be horrifically could turn into a horror versus more of the magical historical fantasy things. Yeah.
God, I feel like this has so much potential to be like a mini series or a movie. Like it just so fascinating. It's not post-apocalyptic, but it's still like the stakes are there, and
Yeah.
it's like human stories of the implications of just like it's the implications of just like they don't it's so complicated and there's
Yes.
so many moving parts, and then the fact that they're completely like most of the time they're in the dark, they're completely in the dark, they have no idea what's happening or why it's happening or of what. And then so it was interesting with Isaiah and his sibling, I
Yeah.
forget because she
Amelia.
was one of the main yeah, it's they're the ones who like they're on top of it a little bit, like they know. And just to see those two completely like like stark contrast of preparation and knowledge and just they accept it because they have no choice.
They have no
So
choice.
they're just yeah, they're just prepared. And the moment when it happens, where she's in the middle of a fight with him, and then it happens, and it's just it's like, oh god, it's like, oh my god, that's the worst.
Yes.
That's the worst. It's like almost equivalent of being mad and then some tragic. Having a fight with like your spouse or a family member, and something happens, and that's like the last words you said to them. It's because
Yes.
even though they're preparing for it, they like almost take it for granted a little bit. It's yeah.
They, as you were saying, they were doing all the preparations. They were doing the things their ancestors expect them to. And of course, since they're siblings that love each other, they're thinking to themselves, no, I'm going to be protect you. I'm going to look out for you. So even though we're both preparing, we both have our own motivations as to how we want the outcome. And so it was hard for each of them to have dreams, to think of their future where they're just waiting for this moment as siblings as to I want to protect the other, but yet I also have to prepare in case my time comes. So I cannot think of
I
in
know.
reality how hard that would be.
And then just like the survivor's guilt. Like
Yes.
I it's just God, there's another freaking layer.
Yes,
Another
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No, but you could be sorry a little bit, but I think
Okay.
it just added to that impact and the reality of it. Yeah, I have a brother. I have a brother and a sister. My sister, she's old. She's 10 years older. She's a half
Mhm.
sibling. But my brother, we're like 2 years apart. So I'm like thinking, "Oh my God, if me and my brother were doing that." And then he was the one to go. And it was just like, now I'm here and he's no
Yes.
longer here. And yeah, it's I'm so glad that you added that the context to that because yeah, she's like, why did I survive? Why am I here? Why am I left behind? And
Yes.
then all the implications of she thinks that she's good, but then
She's not.
surprise,
Yes.
like no. and then and then with the readers, oh, don't worry, you're not a survivor yet. Like you don't worry, no guilt for you. You can put your time
Exactly.
in, put your effort in, do your part. So let's see. Okay, so what do you hope readers get out of the fallen fruit?
Oh my gosh. For me, a lot of the things that came out as this story unfolded is it really gave me an opportunity to really look at my life, look at the things I've gone through, and to really think about how I am here right now because someone else put in the work, because someone else put in the time and they were a survivor. So therefore, I am the descendant of survivors. So I really want people to see the resilience in our family, resilience in our roots, and how those moments, those connections, even though they're gone, we can still remember them. We can still see that they're powerful. And in essence, we're powerful too. So that's what I hope folks get out of it.
I love that. I love that. This reader got that. I'm like, oh, I'm grateful, and it gave me, yeah, like a perspective of like where we're all a result of our family members, our ancestors making choices. Just not even talking about genetics and which sperm found which egg. It's like how even if you want to get meta about it, it's like all these relationships and all these people and all these connections that happened before you. If you look at the statistics of it, it's you're here, and that really is a gift. Like you ended
Yes.
up here. Yeah. And I like, yeah, I love that. Some stuff like this could just like puts it in perspective because it's almost like a what if. It's almost like
Mhm.
a just look at all that happened for you to be here in this place right now. Like, I
Yes.
just
You just hit
so
on the nail at the end. Yeah. All that led
so
up to be at that
powerful.
point.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It's so crazy. Yeah, absolutely. Shawtelle Madison, what is next for you? Are you working on anything that you could talk about?
Yes, I'm still working in the space of speculative historical fiction, so like historical fantasy. And I'm definitely right now playing with a lovely, quirky haunted house. So I won't go too deep into it,
Mm.
but it's definitely a haunted house that doesn't behave the way other haunted houses do. So, yeah, that type of thing.
That's so funny. I it's like spooky season, and so you never know. Inanimate objects might not be inanimate. They might have personalities. They might mess with our characters. That's so funny. I love that. I love that little yeah, I don't wanna get you in trouble, you don't have to go into it any deeper. Okay, so The Fallen Fruit, that book is available now. Where can we find you online and on social media?
Sure, I'm online all over the place. Of course, you can find me on Instagram, Shawtelle Madison, on Facebook, Shawtelle Madison Author. I do have a website, shawtellemadison.com, and you can find me on a couple of the other socials too.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I imagine I'll include the links and all
Thank you.
that in the show notes, but I imagine if anybody goes to your website, they can find where to find you. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so The Fallen Fruit, that book is available now. Chantel, thank you so much. I
Thank
feel like
you.
we could easily just kept talking
We
and
could have
talking and
kept
talking and
going.
like I know we gotta want to have this a 3-hour interview, but yeah, I thank you so much for your
Thank
time
you.
and
Thank you.
yeah, the introspective question or your authentic answers and your generosity. And I'll keep an eye on anything you got going on. Feel free to come back.
Thank
I'd love to
you.
chat
Thank you.
again.
I'd love that. I was about to say we could have kept going. So yeah, I enjoy this very much.
So there you go. That was Shawtelle Madison talking about her book, The Fallen Fruit. That book is available now. Check out the show notes where you can find links to purchase the book and also find her online and on social media. While you're on social media, finding your favorite authors and where to buy the book, please hop on. Please do find Cantina Book Club. Give me a like and a follow, subscribe, review, rating, all that good stuff. It helps me out, helps me reach other readers and listeners who might be interested in these authors and what they have to say about their work. I totally appreciate it. Pre-orders help authors as well, and the reviews and the ratings also do help them. So if you can, hop on over to Goodreads and Amazon and give them a rating. If you need book recommendations, check out my website, cantinabookclub.com. I'm always posting reviews. Even if I am not interviewing the authors, I'm always writing reviews. I've got tons of stuff on there, any genre, fantasy, romance, historical fiction, even memoirs and nonfiction, whatever you're interested in. I'm sure that you can find a genre for you. So if you could check that out, I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thank you guys so much for listening.